Hello and welcome back to the Classics podcast Does Virgil's Aeneid with myself, Katrina Kelly.
And me, Caroline Lawrence.
And welcome. We may have lied in our last episode when we told you that this was the end of the series, but we're back because we have a very special episode for you with a very special guest. We have our first guest on the podcast, and it is the one and only Professor Llewelyn Morgan. He's Professor of Classical Languages at the University of Oxford, and he's a fellow of Brasenose College. And I know that, Caroline, you're a bit of a Llewelyn fan, aren't you?
You can see by the big grin on my face and the fact that I'm wiping away tears of joy.
I'm a huge Caroline Lawrence fan too, so this is a lovin' we're talking about.
So we are so thrilled. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask all the questions that we've been dying to ask and that many of your pupils have probably wanted to ask, but maybe not had the courage. But also it's going to be Virgil centered, but also a little bit you centered. But first of all, do your friends call you Llewelyn or Lou?
If I had any friends, Llewelyn normally, Llewelyn if they're really intimate friends, but no, Llewelyn is fine. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to dive straight in, and I've been loving your lectures on Massillette, little unsolicited plug there, because I obviously did not go to Oxford. So it's a wonderful chance to see great lectures, and you are inspirational. It's just been fantastic listening to your lectures, and your love of Virgil comes through so clearly. And I just wondered, one of my first questions is, you've been learning and teaching Virgil for almost your whole life. Do you remember the first passage that you read and loved and kind of...
I absolutely do. I don't know whether you have this experience of being much more able to remember stuff that you read when you were about sort of 15, 16 than stuff you read 2 days ago. So what I remember very vividly, apart from chunks of Chaucer and Shakespeare and stuff, is the moment in book 2 of the Aeneid where Aeneas is asleep and is about, and then Hector appears to him in a dream. So, tempus erat quo prima quies mortalibus aegris incipit, and so on. And I remember that because it was where my O-level Latin prescription started. I was very lucky. I was able to study Latin at school. And I think what's most interesting about that is that over time, over studying Virgil for my entire life, really, I've understood how much richer that passage is in implications than I'd appreciated at the time. But the beauty of the poetry I could see, back then.
Fantastic. What a great answer. Thank you. Katrina, do you want to do the next question?
Well, I do. It follows on because you say that you've interpreted that passage, you've understood more depth and meaning to it as time has gone on, but have other passages kind of really risen to the fore and become the one that you love the most? Has your feelings changed on that, or is book 2 always something that you go back to?
I mean, that is a good question. I think what I've appreciated more and more over time is that according to Virgil's plan, the second half of the poem is much more important than the first half of the poem. The second half of the poem is, where we really crack on and set about founding Rome. I mean, one passage that I've thought about a lot, because I'm very interested in Hercules as a mythological figure, and specifically Hercules in the Aeneid. And he's not a major figure in the Aeneid, but he kind of bubbles along in the background as a kind of model for Aeneas. And there's a really remarkable, I think, passage in book 10. Pallas, the young warrior, is about to fight Turnus, and as he sort of moves towards Turnus, he prays to Hercules, because Hercules had visited him and his father in Rome. We'd heard about that in book 8. Hercules in the interim has become a god. Having been a hero, he's become a god, and he's there in heaven, and he hears Pallas praying to him, and Hercules weeps. And this is a big deal because Hercules doesn't weep, notoriously. Gods absolutely don't weep. But Hercules is both a new god, he's learning how to be a god, so he hasn't quite sussed it yet, but also it tells you how close this relationship is with Pallas, that he's weeping. But then we hear from Jupiter, who says, "Come on, Hercules, we're gods. These are heroes, mortals. They die." And Jupiter is essentially sort of teaching Hercules the proper attitude of a god to mortal suffering. This passage is about 25 lines long or something. There's so much going on there. It's not true.
That links in with our Pater episode, doesn't it, Katrina? Because I was talking about that wonderful book, Fathers and Sons in the Aeneid by Owen Lee or whatever his name is. And the subtitle is Sic Genitor Natus, thus the father to the son.
Mm.
I gave our listeners the clue which father is saying this to which son.
Yes.
Jupiter to Heracles, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But according to certain versions of the myth, Heracles is the father of Pallas. So it's a moment where you could say that the kind of assimilation of Aeneas and Hercules is very strong, but also that Virgil is kind of exploiting alternative versions of the myth that his readers knew about. We can get glimpses of that.
And it's also fascinating that Aeneas is often a Hercules-like character because he's often wearing a lion skin or sitting on a lion skin or riding on a lion skin.
Yes.
There's that lion skin motif going all the way through. And when I wrote my book from the point of view of a dog who would smell things, he's always smelling lion skin on Aeneas.
No, that's right. And the lion skin is over his shoulders typically, and the shoulders are the sort of characteristic body part of a hero, because with the shoulders you undertake labors or undertake responsibilities. And of course it's when he has the lion skin on that he picks up his father on his shoulders and takes him out of Rome, symbolically kind of taking Troy with him or taking the past with him. So the imagery is really kind of interesting.
Yeah, that imagery is separate. Katrina, what did you want to say?
Yeah, you mentioned Hercules weeping, and we had an episode where we talked about tears, lacrimae, and I wondered what your thoughts are on Virgil's own kind of views around what this means for male heroes in the story around weeping, and when we think about Augustus as well, and to whom is that message of, what does being a man mean to the Roman audience?
Well, I think in general in the Aeneid, I mean, particularly, well, no, actually throughout, I mean, you're encouraged to expect Aeneas to be a pretty stereotypical Roman ideal Roman male. Let's put it this way. When he shows emotion, in particular when he's experiencing kind of affection for Dido in Carthage, we're sort of encouraged to see that as a distraction from what he should be sort of concerned with. I mean, it's more complicated than that. We're meant to feel sympathy for both of those characters, I think, but ultimately he must go and found Rome. It's typical of Virgil, though, and we may well get back to this. He makes us aware of what the consequences are of everything that is being achieved in this poem, everything that Aeneas is achieving, and deeply aware of the tragic consequences of much that happens. So there's much room for tears. If Hercules is crying, that's a big deal. I mean, Hercules does not cry. He certainly shouldn't cry as a god. As I've said, he's crying because why is Pallas dying? Why does Pallas need to die? It's a question that Virgil insists on us contemplating and finding challenging, I think.
One thing we noticed reading through is that I counted the times Aeneas cries. It's at least 8 or 9 times, but always from emotional pain. And when he's got the arrow in his thigh, then he doesn't cry.
Yeah.
Physical pain, the hero doesn't cry, but their Achilles cry, weeps, Odysseus weeps. So I think heroes are allowed to weep for emotional pain, but never for physical.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I think, yeah.
And you were talking about the deep sadness. We did an episode about the private voice of regret that
Perry
Adam Perry talks about the two voices of Virgil. So, and he talks about the whole idea that the Aeneid, of course, seems like propaganda on the surface, but there's something a lot deeper going on underneath. Everything's undercut, and we wondered, has your opinion about the function of the Aeneid, what Virgil was doing. Has that changed over the years? Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Yeah, well, I think the answer is that it hasn't. My view hasn't really changed over the years, but my view has been since I was quite a young scholar that one shouldn't be either an optimist or a pessimist. I'll sort of explain that a little bit further because I mean, insofar as anybody cares, it's the kind of core of my reading of the Aeneid, really. But I mean, on the one hand, there's absolutely no question that we're encouraged to note some intensely negative implications of what Aeneas specifically is doing. So to worry about the consequences of the project that he's pursuing. On the other hand, it's clear that there is a target in mind that the Roman readers of this poem would I mean, by definition, would find positive, the foundation of the place they live in. Yeah. So what I've always suggested is that what we're dealing with here is an exercise by Virgil in encouraging us to understand that the most disastrous circumstances paradoxically generate the most beneficial outcomes. It is a weird and paradoxical idea, but he's writing against the backdrop of the Roman civil wars, which had been the most catastrophic experience of the Romans. And the passage from civil conflict into what was hoped to be the peace, the Augustan peace. So actually the idea that awful trauma that we experienced was a necessary precursor of a new dawn makes a kind of contemporary sense as well. Nobody believes me, by the way, and nobody accepts this reading of the poem. But I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist. In general, in life, actually, I'm neither an optimist or a pessimist.
I mean, in a way, that's almost a Christian idea that all things work together. And that's why, I mean, there is so much of Aeneas that seems to anticipate a Christian worldview that no wonder many people considered him a proto-Christian. But that's way off.
No, well, and this text is coming out of a not dissimilar cultural circumstance.
And do you feel that Aeneas is therefore closely modelled on Virgil himself with his own experiences of civil war and Rome's context? Or indeed, is he based on the Homeric version or other versions? What is that amalgam of Aeneas's character? Well,
First thing I always insist with my students on saying is that Aeneas is firmly based on Aeneas kind of thing. Aeneas has to convince us that he's an independent character who makes sense on his own terms. Otherwise, we don't care enough. At the same time, there's lots of things that are kind of feeding into Virgil's representation of Aeneas. I think the most important are probably the Homeric hero, not necessarily in this order, by the way. Homeric heroes, including Aeneas himself, obviously he's a character from the Iliad as well as other sources, and Odysseus and Achilles are important models for him. But aside from that, most importantly, he's every Roman and with a strong element of Augustus, because Augustus is kind of presenting himself as every Roman as well. Not every Roman in the sense of the man on the Clapham omnibus, not that kind of democratic idea, but the ideal Roman, or he's aspiring to be the ideal Roman, the ideal that Romans aim for. I think that's the most important shaping influence on him.
So that's lovely. I'm very into story structure and Hollywood screenwriting stuff. And they often talk about the character arc. Does the character develop? Yeah. They often start off with a flaw, and the whole point of the hero's journey is that they learn how to be who they're meant to be.
Yeah.
And I think in Stedman's commentary, he quotes somebody as saying that Aeneas completes his arc by the end of book 2 now. So what's the rest of it? Do you think Aeneas has an character arc?
He does. It's a character arc that doesn't resolve the challenges that he presents to the reader. But I'd say that one important aspect of development of Aeneas is the knowledge that he gains. This is probably a feature most of all of the first half of the poem, but it's relevant also in places like Book 8 and the Shield and so on. He starts off as somebody who isn't terribly clear what he's supposed to do. And in particular, when his major source of guidance, his father, dies, he goes completely off piste and spends time in Carthage. This is a crazy place for a Roman, the founder of Rome, to spend time. By a slow process, and an important moment is Book 6, where he's hearing from his father again. He meets his father again. His father says, "Oh, here's the future." He learns, he gains the knowledge, he internalizes the importance of what he is setting out to do. And one thing that we're not concerned about in the second half of the poem is that Aeneas doesn't know what he's there for, whereas in the first half of the poem we are a little bit. I mean, if you're a Roman reader and your hero is hanging out in Carthage, something has gone pretty catastrophically wrong. Hello, what are you doing? You don't have that concern anymore. You do have concerns, that he can be a bit of a head case at various points in book 10 in particular. You might well have concerns. The Romans could tolerate extreme violence better than we can, but even they, I think, would have been somewhat concerned about how he behaves at a later point. So yeah, in some ways, certainly.
So does he actually does he change at the end? Is he different at the end than he was at the beginning? And if so, in what way? I mean, we did a whole episode almost on that, the violent ending and all the questions that raises, which...
It's an interesting one. I mean, the way I read the ending, I mean, it's related to what I was saying about optimism, pessimism earlier, but more specifically, what's happening at the end is that when he sees the baldric that Turnus has taken from Pallas, he reverts to the state of mind he had after the killing of Pallas in Book 10. And there's a passage, after the killing of Pallas, when Aeneas is as terrifying as it's possible to be, where he's committing human sacrifice, where he's giving no quarter, all these kinds of things, which is kind of resolved in Book 10 through Lausus and Mezentius. And so, everything calms down. But for some reason, at the very end of the poem, wants Aeneas to revert to that really berserk kind of character that he had in book 10. Now, what we're saying there is that he's totally clear about what he has to do. In a sense, he has to win the war. Yeah, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But how he wins the war and what he does at the end of them, I think Virgil deliberately makes extremely difficult to accept in a straightforwardly ethical way.
You think he was talking to Augustus? I'm talking to you now. Don't behave like this.
Well, I mean, yeah, and the beautiful thing about this is that, Augustus, we have Augustus sort of writing letters to Virgil saying, "Come on, give us a bit, give us an idea what you're writing in the Aeneid." And Virgil, like any poet, isn't telling him. He sort of knows. I think he's writing something that can count as sort of as propaganda, not propaganda in the sort of standard sense, but something that sort of serves the purposes of Augustus. But he's doing it his own way, and it's what's made it last as long as it's lasted, I suppose. His own choices.
Oh, there's so much more. Katrina, have you got a question?
Still sticking with Aeneas, is going back to this idea that he was perhaps a traitor earlier in the sack of Troy, and whether that then influences how he's trying to redeem himself as he goes through then his later journey. Do you buy that idea at all?
I certainly buy it in the sense that Virgil, in writing a poem about Aeneas, has chosen a hero who brings huge advantages to him. He's a Homeric hero, but he's also the ancestor of Augustus. But Aeneas also comes with quite a lot of baggage and quite a lot of unfortunate baggage. So you can certainly see how Virgil's representation of Aeneas is implicitly designed to answer some of the alternative, or sort of correct some of the alternative claims about what Aeneas did. I mean, if you think about what Aeneas does in Troy in Book 2, is he criticizes himself. He's describing this to Dido, of course. He criticizes himself for acting irrationally in defense of Troy. He's had the dream, but he's forgotten the dream, so he goes out and sort of kills as many Achaeans as he can when he should be skedaddling because Hector told him to. So in a way, Virgil is kind of insisting on a particular fault which is the opposite fault of being a traitor. He's pushing the devotion of Aeneas to such an extent because we've got to be convinced that Aeneas did absolutely everything he could to prevent Troy from falling. There are other things like that. I mean, the whole story of Iulus, this son who's got two names. I mean, what's that about? But there's lots of complication in the back history and alternative stories of which say that Aeneas didn't have any male sons, or Iulus didn't have any male sons. Authorities for people like Aeneas and Cato, claimed this. Any of those, you believe any of those, and the whole structure of Virgil's idea falls down. There's no ancestry between Aeneas and Augustus. But the important point though is this: that Virgil tells the story so well, right? Virgil produces a version of the Aeneas myth that is so powerful that it just wipes away any alternative account. This becomes the authoritative account, and it becomes the authoritative account because Virgil has just told it better than anybody else could do. Yeah.
I was just reading actually one alternative account that Aeneas had several sons, and that Ascanius was the eldest and went off and was ruling the kingdom for a while. But that image of Aeneas with his dad on his back, who's holding the Penates or the Palladium or whatever it is, and his son, the three generations, the father, the son, the grandson, is so powerful, isn't it?
Yes, no, incredible. And as you say, is there in various places, but they're the previous generation on a coin of Julius Caesar. If you want to convey your claim to power, your claim to authority, Aeneas is the way to do it.
So a slightly different question, because as part of the podcast, we start each episode with a different word. And we often dive into a particular passage or a favourite simile of ours that we then go on to unpack a little bit and discuss and hear the Latin. Do you have a favourite simile from the whole of the Aeneid, Llewelyn? And would you like to either share it with us or give us a sense of why you feel Virgil's words are so powerful in some contexts?
Yes, though I hope you're disappointed in what I say, because that's kind of the point. My very favourite simile in the Aeneid, the brilliance of which came home to me in a tutorial many, many years ago with Chris Tudor, who's actually the person that runs Massillette. But he basically said to me, we were reading book 6, and at the point when Aeneas starts heading into the underworld, ibant obscuri, and so on, they went in darkness. There's a simile, and I'm not doing Virgil justice here, but basically it goes like this. Aeneas and the Sibyl are heading in darkness into the underworld, and it was like a man walking in darkness. So it's a simile that doesn't do the basic work of a simile. I mean, the whole point of a simile is it's got to be kind of somewhat like what you're talking about, but then sort of different in other respects that really make you think about it. And Chris said to me, how can you justify your claim that this guy's a great poet when he said, the equivalent of Wordsworth saying, I wandered lonely like a bloke wandering lonely. And I said to him, and having said to him, I actually believed myself. You don't have to believe me. That Virgil is such a great poet that he will risk that kind of criticism. And what he's trying to do at this point is just bleed his poetry of all colour. We're going into the underworld, this place where stuff isn't quite there fully and colours don't quite work. One of the effects he gets in the underworld is that Aeneas somehow has gone down to the underworld in sort of armour, and he's gleaming, but everything else is kind of wispy and hard to define. And at this point, he even sort of loses the colour that comes with similes. That light that similes bring into poetry, the poetry loses its inner sense as we're running into the underworld. It's an incredible man.
But it's also good because, of course, everyone knows what darkness is like, and in the ancient world, darkness would be dark with no electrical lighting, and on a moonless night, it would be terrifying. It's so powerful in its simplicity. I thought you were going to do the simile at the very beginning. I think it's the first simile where the storm was like an orator instead of the orator being like a storm. The storm was, or when Poseidon, when Neptune calms it like an orator calming a rowdy audience, which is a kind of reverse simile, isn't
No,
it?
which is fantastic. I mean, he's so clever with what he does with
Yeah.
these. I mean, in many ways, the similes of the Aeneid are doing a lot more than the similes of Homer, really. Though I think we probably assume that Virgil thought the similes of Homer were doing more than we think they're maybe doing. There we get into the head of Virgil, which is an interesting place if
So speaking of the head of Virgil, just super quick, and you might tell your students, don't try to do this at home, but what can we learn about, what do we think about Virgil's life, like his whole attitude to mothers and his whole attitude to fathers? Can we glean anything about Virgil himself from the Aeneid, do you think? Anything leak through of his trauma, his background?
I don't know. I sort of resist that. I mean, the poetry that he wrote is so I mean, it's not as diverse as some as Horace or something like that. But I mean, from the eclogues, from his pastoral poetry, that's his early poetry, to the Aeneid, it's difficult. I find it difficult to see too much of the historical Virgil there, and I do see him as an astonishing artist that can create poetry that will do what he wants it to do without necessarily the element of the personal element. That said, you can't do what Virgil is doing in this particular genre, in the epic genre, without implicitly or explicitly claiming to be a very great poet. Only a very great poetic power is adequate to tell such a great story, to tell a story that's a continuation of Homer. And going back to that moment in Book 2 where Hector appears to Aeneas, I mean, one of the things I've learned, and it wasn't something I saw, it's something that another scholar had seen, was that at that moment when Hector is, as it were, handing over the baton in dreams to Aeneas, Virgil is alluding to Aeneas, the great predecessor epic poet in Rome, and a point in Aeneas where Aeneas is explaining how he's writing epic, and he's basically saying, I'm writing epic because I am Homer reincarnated. So at that point, there's a lot going on, but one and the same time, the hero of the Iliad, Hector, is handing over control to the hero of the Aeneid, Aeneas. But in the background, Homer is handing the baton to Aeneas, handing the baton to Aeneas. So in a very subtle way, Virgil is saying, I'm a fantastic poet. And that's fair. You know, he was.
Katrina.
Okay, Llewelyn, we have the quick fire round. Are you ready?
No, but go ahead.
Team Aeneas or Team Dido?
You'll know the answer. Team both. Team both. You know, it's a tragedy. He had to leave, but you know, you wouldn't have the Punic Wars if Aeneas hadn't washed up on Carthage and had a love affair. So you know, you could say they're both, as you would feel as much sympathy for both of them and condemn each of them just as much. But that's the world as Virgil saw it.
Okay, would you trust Anchises or Helenus more?
If I were Anchises' son, which I might be in this context, I'd trust Anchises more. He's
Camilla or Lavinia?
Camilla, absolutely every time. She's an outstanding hero. Yeah,
Juno or Venus?
Has got the best speeches. You know, I mean, you're there thinking, this can't happen, but blimey, I'm persuaded that this should happen. Yes, let's have a war between the future components of Rome in Italy. Absolutely, Juno. I'm completely persuaded. Juno is definitely the one.
Golden Bough or Special Shield?
Special Shield, please. With all the sort of future of my descendants presented on it in the finest artistic form.
If you're Virgil, would you take more from Aeneas or Apollonius?
In the bits that matter, more from Aeneas, but in the bits that people are more inclined to read, like Book 4, Apollonius is provides the material that turn the pages.
And Professor Morgan, Virgil or Ovid?
Well, that's a tricky one. Really depends. I was going to say it depends on the day. It depends on the time of day. Really,
The time of day.
I mean, it's, you know, Ovid for fun, Virgil Virgil when, for serious. I mean, I can't decide. I can't decide between those. There's like, Horace and Lucretius and the rest of them to compete. You
There's
need
not
not.
much humor in Virgil. We thought
No, that's for sure.
we'd do a podcast on the humor in Virgil. It would be very short.
Very short indeed. No, if we're looking for humour, definitely Ovid. Yeah.
Katrina, can I do the cultural questions now?
Please do.
That leads on quite nicely. So we love pop culture, and we wondered if you were cast on a desert island for your desert island discs, what would be your just three favorite songs? Also, your favorite movie to take, because I love movies. And this is the clincher. Which book from the ancient world would you take? As well as, of course, the Bible and Shakespeare. So your three songs first.
Okay, fabulous. Right, I'm going to go with Fantasia on a theme by Thomas Tallis, by Vaughan Williams. And that encapsulates a huge amount of my life. And since I've mentioned Thomas Tallis, there's a wonderful Latin setting for Pentecost called Loque Bantur Variis Linguis. They sang in various tongues by Thomas Tallis. And at that point, it was tough. I was thinking between mainly Joan Armatrading and Leonard Cohen, but I'll go with Leonard Cohen. There's quite a recent song by Leonard Cohen called Boogie Street, which is just so profound. It's not true. Favourite film, very, very tough indeed, but I'm going with A Matter of Life and Death, the Powell and Pressburger movie. And I'll correct what I said before. I think that, given that it is a desert island, given that I'll need an improvement to my mood on a fairly regular basis, it's going to be Ovid's Metamorphoses that I'll take with me. Yeah.
It's a win for Ovid in the end.
That's great. So,
Excellent choices.
In our, I think we're drawing to an end. You'll be glad to hear.
No, I could go on forever.
We'll get you back. Anyway, in our third podcast, based around the word musa, we each wrote 3-line epitaphs in the style of Virgil's supposedly self-written epitaph. So what would yours be?
Okay, so I come from a place called St Helens in Merseyside, so that explains the first bit of it, which otherwise might be a bit worrying. I say, St Helen bore me, Oxford made me grow up, and I pondered Virgil, Horace, and a bunch of other random stuff.
So Ovid isn't even mentioned in there.
He could be the other random stuff.
He's another random who you take to the desert island. Thank you so much for sharing. That's quite personal, and we really appreciate it. And I think we're going to give you the Joan Armatrading. Which one would it be?
Down to Zero.
Okay, brilliant, fantastic. Yeah. I'm going to go listen to all of those now.
Yes, we'll curate a playlist for everyone to listen to as they read their Virgil and have music blend. Thank you so much, Llewelyn. That's been such a pleasure.
My pleasure.
We just want to say we're massive fangirls.
That's it, guys. That brings this series of the Classics Podcast Does Virgil's Aeneid to a close. Thank you for being with us. There will still be some bonus material, I think, out there coming soon for you. But we hope that you have enjoyed it, that you've taken so much away, that you have new thoughts, new opinions. We'd love to hear them, and that you will go away and keep rereading. I think that the key lesson that we have taken from this is that Virgil keeps giving us great things. There's always new passages to explore, to rethink, to perceive in a different way. And as Llewelyn says, that you can have the same thoughts that you had many years ago, you can change them, but you can always revisit and be inspired by them all the time. And if you get bored of Virgil, you can go to Ovid. So maybe there'll be some Ovid content coming soon. Thank you.